Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mary Jean Jakubowski, and I have the honor of being the director with the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. And it is my greatest pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon for our first ever Chairman's Book Club. And without further ado, let me introduce to you the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library Board of Trustees Chairman Frank Housh.
Good afternoon, everyone, and first and above all, thank you so much for coming to what is our inaugural meeting of the Chairman's Book Club. This is the library's and my initiative. The idea is to augment the library's role as a place for thoughtful, intelligent discussion. That is an important role that the library serves, and the idea behind the Chairman's Book Club is to choose to talk about important societal issues through contemporary books. And we have chosen for this year two books which raise important issues that all of us are dealing with. First, the issue of race. That's today's discussion, Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. On October the 5th, we will be discussing Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life, by Professor Edward O. Wilson, who you may recognize the name, who is a longtime author and a Pulitzer Prize winner and professor emeritus at Harvard University, discussing issues related to ecology, global warming, and our role in the ecosphere. So thank you for coming today. I'm not going to spend too much time talking up here because I really want this to be about a discussion between all of us and our wonderful panel. Let me introduce them. First, we have, to my right, Dr. Anthony Neal, who's been a political science professor at Buff State for 27 years. His teaching center on African American political culture, international relations, the American presidency and Congress. He's currently writing a book on President Obama and is a published poet and photographer. His most recent publications include the government textbook, The American Political Narrative, and his third collection of verse titled Love Agnostic, The Eternal Protest. Next to Professor Neal is Sharon Holley, who is a storyteller and retired librarian from our own library system, founding member of both the African American Librarians of Western New York and Spin of Storytellers of Western New York. Sharon currently works with Tradition Keepers, Black Storytellers of Western New York. Her unique approach to storytelling incorporates song, costumes, and instruments. Through most of her adult life, she's worked to promote the heritage and culture of African people. She's contributed to various publications and has won both the Governor's Salute to Harriet Tubman Spirit Award and the Zora Neale Hurston Award from the National Association of Black Storytellers. And last but not least, on the far end, Heron Simmonds-Price, an adjunct professor at Canisius, specializing in social and political philosophy as well as the philosophy of race. He earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy, from my own heart, just like myself, from from Brandeis University, has a master's in philosophy from UB. Heron has previously worked with organizations including the Partnership for the Public Good and Occupy Buffalo. He's spoken on racial and social justice, poverty, and racial identity on various platforms, including right here in our library. I am going to proceed with the discussion today by asking each of our panelists to give us just a few moments of their thoughts about the book, some of the important themes that were raised. After that, we want to open it up to discussion, and we plan on wrapping it up at about 1 o'clock. So hopefully we're starting on time, ending on time, sending you off into a beautiful day. So if he's here, is Jim Anderson here? For those of you who listen to WUFO, Professor Neal and I appeared on the show on the 14th and yesterday on the 31st, talking not just about the book, but other issues, and we received a lot of call-ins. It's fair to say that the phone lines lit up. I credit that to Jim and to Professor Neal. So we've already begun a vital discussion over the airwaves, and I wanted to thank Jim for having us on his show. But I'll turn it right down to Professor Neal.
Testing. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. In looking at the the book, I decided to present the thoughts that I have regarding the book by presenting you with three particular quotes from the book, and then showing how they intersect with other writers and thinkers who also address the issue and subject of race. Now, the first quote is on page 83 of the book, and I'll read it and then give you why, the reason as to why this particular quote struck me and stayed with me. The author is talking about talking to his son, and he's talking to his son, explaining to him the love that his mother had given him, and he's explaining to his son that he had never understood that type of love until his son, that he was born as well. She knew that the galaxy itself could kill me, that all of me could be shattered, and all of her legacy spilled upon the curb like bum wine. And no one would be brought to account for this destruction, because my death would not be the fault of any human, but the fault of some unfortunate but immutable fact of race, imposed upon an innocent country by an inscrutable judgment of invisible gods. The earthquake cannot be subpoenaed. The typhoon will not bend under indictment. They sent the killer of Prince Jones back to his work because he was not a killer at all. He was a force of nature, the helpless agent of our world's physical laws. Prince Jones was a friend of the author who was killed. Prince Jones was a friend of the author's who was killed by a police officer, an undercover police officer at that. He essentially uses a metaphor in terms of the reason why the police officer was not indicted, the reason why the police officer was put back on desk, was that the killing of his young friend was essentially akin to a force or an act of nature. When we listen to news reports and we hear about tornadoes, earthquakes, and hurricanes, for example, we've been listening about bad weather happening in the Midwest recently, floods and what have you, and we hear about the death of individuals that occur in the flood. We agonize over it, but we don't think twice about it per se. And he's saying that the floods will not be indicted, or the hurricanes, tornadoes will not be held accountable. And he's looking at the killing of his friend, by the police officer in the same light. And we've noticed recently, over the past couple of years, with the uptick in police killings of unarmed black males in the African American community, and the lack of indictment of many of these individuals when this occurs. Now, the part about this that is most striking is that it takes on a natural law theme. And a natural law theme in terms of the uptick in killing of unarmed African Americans, African American males, is really a dangerous thing to behold, because it's seen as natural. It's seen as something that is acceptable, it's something that's just a part of life. And I think he's trying to encourage us to get beyond this, to find some type of accountability for those who take the lives of individuals, even under the cloak of law, that some type of accountability must be put into place. Now, the next quote is a theme that's throughout the book, is also what happens to the black body in the United States. And let me read you this quote and then share a little bit of insight into this as well. And some of these quotes are riveting. When I was reading through the book, some of the quotes are quite riveting, and it leaves a very deep impression upon you. Here's what I would like for you to know. In America, it is traditional to destroy the black body. It is heritage. Enslavement was not merely an antiseptic borrowing of labor, it is not so easy to get a human being to commit their body against its own elemental interest. And so enslavement must be casual. Wrath and random manglings, the gashing of heads and brains blown out over the river as the body seeks to escape. It must be rape so regular as to be industrial. There is no uplifting way to say this. I have no praise anthems nor old Negro spirituals. The spirit and the soul and the body and the brain were indestructible, or are destructible. That is precisely why they are so precious. And the soul did not escape. The spirit did not steal away on gospel wings. Now, I think on the back cover of this book, Toni Morrison says this is must reading. And when I read that particular passage, it made me think about a passage in Toni Morrison's Beloved, a sermon from Baby Suggs, where she is telling her former, her co-enslaved Africans how they must love themselves. And just a brief quote from Toni Morrison's Beloved, Baby Suggs, a sermon in the clearing. Here, she said, in this here place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it hard. Yonder, they do not love your flesh. They despise it. They don't love your eyes. They just as soon pick them out. No more than they love the skin on your back. Yonder, they flay it. And oh, my people, they do not love your hands. Those they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands. Love them. Raise them up. Kiss them. Touch others with them. Pat them together. Stroke them on your face, because they don't love that either. I thought that was quite similar between this rendering in Toni Morrison's Beloved and Coates' statement about the destruction of the body. The thing for us to take away from this is that we're talking about two different time periods. We're talking about enslavement around the 1850s, and we're talking about 2015, 2016. Now for us, we have to ask ourselves, why do these narratives seem so familiar to one another when we're talking about two different periods? Perhaps it means that, yes, things have changed, and yet there's a current in our society that remains unchanged. And that unchanged current is the jeopardy that we find that the black body is placed in the American context. The last quote, the third quote, brings about, for me, the intersectionality between Coates' text and other aspects in society. Now, I will not read this entire quote, but it's when he's talking about, it's on page 86 of the text, and it's when he's talking about when he went to New York City, and he went to New York City just prior to 9/11, and he talks about the attacks on the trade centers and what have you, and he reveals his innermost thoughts about that particular incident. And when I read that particular passage, and he's essentially upset or angry about the patriotism or the outpouring of patriotism that followed that particular incident, because he talks about Lower Manhattan, and he says that Lower Manhattan brought a lot of pain to many Africans or enslaved Africans prior to this attack in 2011. And what I took away from that in terms of intersectionality was reading, if you go back and read Frederick Douglass's The Meaning of July 4th for the Negro. And he talks about essentially, what does July 4th, your celebrations, what does that have to do with me based on my particular condition in society? Now, some may get upset and see Coates as not being essentially patriotic or what have you, but then you have to understand why the caged bird sings. You have to understand why someone who is experiencing the loss of a friend at the hands of police who's not held accountable, why someone would make these type statements, and that the pain and the anger and the emptiness that flows from this particular quote. It's not for us to indict this particular individual, but I think it's for us to question this particular individual to gain more insight into why you feel the way you feel here in the United States. Those are the three quotes that I take away from the text.
Good afternoon. When I read this book, my first thought came about the story. There were some things that stood out to me. One of the things that stood out to me was the theme about parenthood. What does it mean to raise a child in 21st century? And to make it more specific, what does it mean to raise a black child, and in Coates' case, a black male child in this United States and in this world today? How is that parenting different from the parenting that he might have gotten from his father, or is it the same? I recall reading several slave narratives where the parent, and in fact Coates kind of talks a little bit about this, where the parent would beat the child for an infraction, saying, "I'd rather kill you myself than have them kill you." And that brought to mind the Baltimore mother during the riots when she came to pull her son and she was beating him and making him go home, and they said, "Oh, what a horrible thing, why is she doing that? He should be able..." And I think her feeling was, "I'll kill you first rather than let these streets kill you." So this whole notion of what does it mean to be a parent of a black child in the United States kind of came through all of this. I have read Coates' memoir. I can't remember the name of it. The Beautiful Struggle. I had read that several years ago. And I was sharing a conversation with Mary Jean that I know Coates' father. And I kind of understand a little bit about his home situation. His father was a librarian, a research librarian at the Howard University, Moreland Spin Yarn Collection. His father is a book publisher, Black Classics Press in Baltimore. His father's a writer. His father was a member of the Black Panther Party. And his father, according to Coates, had a house filled with books everywhere. And he was able to gain his education through first reading the books that his father collected, as well as going to what he called, quote, the Mecca, Howard University, and beginning to use the library there to read, to instruct himself. So I'm torn between what is it that he's learning, what is it that the father put on him. When he went to the father to ask questions as a young man about what was going on in the world, his father sent him to books. His father sent him to read more about it as opposed to answering the question. He wanted him to figure it out for himself. The other theme I got from this is the talk. Most African American parents have to have the talk with their children. And what is the talk? The talk is, how do you behave so that you can survive childhood and become an adult? You know, the talk was mostly, I used to refer to it because growing up in the South, the talk was a Southern thing. The talk would have been what Emmett Till's mother told him before he went down south. How are you supposed to act? What are you supposed to do so that you can come back to Chicago? You know, the talk is, how do you tell your child that you're not free, basically, that you don't have the liberty to experience all the joys of childhood because someone is waiting to cut that short, to take that away from you. So most African American parents tend to, at a very early age, have the talk, you know, and most commonly, most African American, I'd say mothers and even fathers, have it with their young men about where to be, who to associate with, how to look, how to dress, how to talk. I mean, and there are even little booklets like what to do when stopped by the police. That's like the printed, the talk, you know, so that you know, keep your hands visible, you know. Don't make any sudden gestures. Don't move quickly. You know, don't make the eye contact. So this is all the kind of things that I see that Coates is trying to embody in his son, but at the same time, you don't want the child to be fearful of living. You want your child to experience all that there is to experience, but you know the danger. And you also know from reading this book that it doesn't matter if society sees you as, quote, thug or church boy. You know, what matters, as the last poets used to say, you know, it's not because, it's because you're black. You know, it doesn't matter that your pants hang down or you wear a three-piece suit. It's because you're black that you're going to get stopped. I'm often reminded of a conversation that I heard once with Congressman Dellums from California. So when he got elected to Congress, he was in Washington, D.C. He was driving on a dark road, his car stopped. He got out to see about his car, and the police came up to him and told him to assume the position, the spread, put your hands on the car. He said, I am Congressman Ron Dellums from California. They said the N-word, put your hands on the car or you're going to be the dead congressman from California. And at that point, I think you realize he could have been president from California. It did not matter. What they saw was a black man. And it's almost the same when we see it today. When young men are accosted or when they are shot, nobody comes up and say, did you graduate high school? What was your GPA? You know, did you finish? How many books have you read? Can you speak a little bit of Spanish? You know, have you been to church today? Nobody asks that question. Nobody, the people who stop don't make a distinction. They see the black body, and the black body is wherever you are. So, like Prince Jones in this book, who was an educated young man who came from a middle-class family, who treasured education, who went to Howard, who never got into any trouble, who never bothered anybody. It did not matter. At the moment he was stopped by this police, it did not matter because those requirements, those questions did not come forth before he was shot. The other thing that I bring forth from reading this book is the survival skills. There's not a big difference between the survival skills that it takes to be on the street than it does to be in the school. And that's what I took away from Coates. That you have to know the language of both. The language of the street to keep you safe, the language of the school. So he was a good student, but school did not nurture that. So he had to be able to survive that. And at the same time, on the streets, he had to know when danger was in front of him, and he had to know the language to survive that. So he had to know the street language to get from school to home, and then once he got to school, he had to know the language of the school to stay there. And they were really the same languages. They were really the same kinds of gestures, the same kind of things that he had to do. So his discovery came to me in the form of education. And not so much the education of going to school, but the education of learning to read, to think, and to question. so that he could spend hours in the library reading text and thinking that he was going to see a unified theme, but that's not life. Everybody's not going to think the same. You're not going to come to the same conclusion. So you have to read almost everything or a lot of different things. You just can't read one thing. But he learned that discovery from the school, from being at Howard, and not Howard the school, but Howard, as he calls it, the Mecca, which is kind of like all of the people, the history, the location, the alumni. That was what was centered. That's what made the Mecca to him. And growing up, I would hear students who had gone to Howard University, and they always referred to it with, I've been to the Mecca. You know, it's like I've been to the mountaintop in a sense. Like I've got what they had to give me just by being in that surrounding. And the last thing that I wanted to say about the themes of this book that I discovered, the murder of Prince Jones, I think finally had Coates realize the love that the parents have for the child. That the beating he got as a young boy from his father was, in a sense, the love that the father is trying to say, I love you, I want to keep you safe, you know, I want you to grow into manhood. One of the quotes that I wrote down, in addition to the one that Dr. Neal talked about, the one like, in America, it is traditional to destroy the black body, it is heritage. There was a quote on page 78 about police reform. He said, there is real distance between their own attitudes, he's talking about the police, and those of the ones appropriate to protect them. So I want to just say there are a lot of things in the books, but it really talks about parenthood growing up. What does it mean for the black child?
This is an extremely rich book. I'm going to try and discuss some themes from philosophy that I already had an interest in, that I feel like this book welcomes. I'm very much interested in the idea of personal identity. It's a very long tradition in Western philosophy. We have philosophers from many different traditions, like Buddhism, Indian philosophy, African philosophy. They also have weighed in interesting ways on this notion of identity. In our context, in the American context, we have our Christian heritage. And one of the powerful themes that I found going through the book was his talk of the dream. And I see a powerful counterpose between the talk of the dream and his use of the term bodies. So when we talk about identity, philosophers typically start off by pointing out that you can't find the identity of something in a feature that's fleeting and changing. So most philosophers, thinking logically, make the point that personal identity can't be found in the physical body, because all the parts of the physical body are always in flux and change. So if you identify yourself, let's just say, to be silly, just to give you a trivial example, with your fingernail, well, that's very problematic, because at some point you're going to cut it off, or it's going to fall off, you see? So that's not where your identity lies. And when we think more deeply about the person, all the parts of ourselves are changing. So you can't find your identity in any part, in anything. So our tradition has focused typically on the mind when we talk about identity. And very significantly, I think, memory. John Locke, a very important philosopher, I think, for America, and I'm going to say later on for liberalism, talks about memory as being the key to our identities. certainly in the way we live, the events that are formative for us have a greater resonance in our minds. We remember them with greater vividness, and we return to them. It's just part of the reason why we remember them more, is because we recreate them, actually. So I'm very fascinated with his talk of the body, because he still talks about, uses the body to talk about identity. And I also noticed that he avoids, not that he avoids, he challenges religion, right? He very overtly says, I'm not religious. I don't believe in these other things. And I think that's very important, because this book is another version, or a latter version of what Baldwin did. James Baldwin wrote The Fire Next Time in '62, I believe. And his father was a preacher. He flourished in his religious community like many African Americans, and myself. I came from a religious community. I started philosophizing when I was 5 years old in Sunday school. Okay, I started challenging my Sunday school teachers, and they're like, avoid that one. And this focus on the body has intense political implications. Quite a number of philosophers have criticized Christianity. I'm thinking specifically, I won't say quite a number, Machiavelli, an important philosopher, really criticized the church because it invests the person in an otherworldly set of concerns. You're not supposed to really be too concerned about this world, because we live forever, our souls, and the life we really have to worry about is the eternal life. Is it going to be one of damnation, or is it going to be one of infinite joy and salvation? That makes all of this nothing, okay? So politically, that's dangerous. Machiavelli wanted people who were more oriented towards a traditional political goal, which is glory, which is, again, memory, right? To be remembered is what it's about. So you have to make your mark in this world. The Christian focus on the other world makes all of this world not so important. So when he talks about bodies, he talks about something that's, first of all, fleeting, and second of all, not politically relevant, typically, right? But bodies are terribly relevant, especially when we think about race. Our theorizing about race falls into a camp that says that race is nothing. It's a fiction that we need to stop talking about altogether. And a camp that says that race is a social construct, and we need to either deconstruct it or reconstruct it in a more just and fair way. When he talks about bodies, I think he emphasizes the fact that race is a feature that, one, we don't get to choose, and two, we don't get to hide. Now, the talk about dreams I see as fascinating and, again, relevant to bodies, because we don't really relate to the physical as much as we think we do. What we experience are ideas. We associate our ideas with bodies. And ideas, dreams, can, in a powerful way, make our bodies wholly invisible. I think the American tradition has had the problem of an obsession on dreams, especially dreams of freedom, and this necessitates a thinking about the black body that renders it wholly invisible. This is powerfully developed by Ralph Ellison and The Invisible Man, and his collection of essays, Shadow and Act. I highly recommend that. So the fleeting nature of bodies speaks to this world. And what I think Coates does is he connects bodies up with love and being beloved. And we cherish love in part because for the older among us, you might have had love come and go. And it is wonderful, essential to living this life in a way that's meaningful, but fleeting, and we get it when we get it, and when we don't, it's gone. The lives of our children are precious. So I brought this little prop here. This is my son, Dennison. He is now 12 years old. This is a picture of him when he had just turned 8. He came out with me to the Occupy Buffalo big protest there. Dennison is mixed race. I have tried to talk about race with him, but I've never tried to force a conversation of race on him. And, you know, I'm a chess player. I think it worked. My gambit worked, because now, you know, he comes to me and he asks me questions, and sometimes I come to him and ask him questions. Like recently, I'm like, geez, that song that's on the radio, and he listened to WBOK, what's that? Say, I'm in love with the cocoa. I'm like, what is cocoa? And he tells me very clearly and plainly, cocaine. Cocaine. So we have this public life. We would like to, storyteller points out, we would like to shepherd our children through this life safely. We'd like to be good parents, but we have to recognize that we are only one influence on the shaping of our children. And unfortunately, we're often not the most powerful influence. Take as one little anecdotal piece to think about. I don't know any parent who's telling their child to like let their pants sag, but it's a dogged feature of Black life, especially young Black life, that hasn't gone anywhere. In fact, it's more prevalent now than when I was young, and it started out. We can influence our children, but we're not the strongest influence on our children. So my strategy has been, well, let's keep the lines of communication open and engage him fully when he does want to communicate. So I see, I want to just, before I finish, I want to just mention how this focus on bodies and beloved come together. I think in our life and in this book, really powerful. I think that one of the powerful focuses of the book is the situation of Prince George. And I think a huge thing that we're struggling with right now is Black lives and their fate in our social world. I think we have a real problem of a social world that is actually supportive of the lives of our children, all of them, not just Black people. When I hear about the dialectic between Black lives mattering and all lives matter, I think the true answer is no life matters. Your life doesn't matter in this society. What matters is wealth. Every life has a price. And frankly, the people who have more money, it's not that their lives matter more, it's just that they have more power. And they can avoid the dangers of our society in a great deal. So I want to just end by saying, you think about a number of the Black people who died very publicly. Look at the condition of their spirit and their voices and their bodies. I see different cases of silenced Black bodies that we then have to do the work of making live. The default position in our society seems to be pretty clearly that Black lives are to be invisible, Black bodies are to be invisible, and Black lives are marginal. So We have been trying recently to fight against that by talking about the humanity of these lives. So think about Oscar Grant, who ended his life on the floor of a train stop. And that would have disappeared if it wasn't for the fact that people witnessed his black body's death and brought life to his dead body. You think about Trayvon Martin's case, where Trayvon died in Florida, and his parents didn't know about the condition of his body. I think it was 3 days later is when they were able to find out. Trayvon had a toxicology test done on his body, but his killer didn't. His killer was able to walk away without anyone questioning the situation of his body. I think about the words that we have for Eric Gardner. We don't know too much about his spirit, but we have the words, "I can't breathe." And we can witness what happened to his body. His big black body had to be subdued unto death. We look at, I'm forgetting his name, the gentleman in Baltimore who died, Freddie Gray. Freddie Gray reacted in fear to the sight of police officers. They caught his black body and they gave him the punishment. The greatest punishment in dealing with the police is not respecting them. And so running away from me means you don't respect me, so therefore that means you are now open to torture. So they put him in a van. They didn't strap him down like they were supposed to. And recently, a grand jury came back and said that no one was going to be, it wasn't the grand jury. He wasn't, I forget the details, but I'm sitting in the car with my son taking him to Taekwondo. And they said on NPR that they found that it was unreasonable to prosecute this officer. There wasn't anything he could have done. And I made the point to my son, we have a can in the back of the car we're waiting to return for as a bottle. And every time I make a turn, you hear the can falling around in the back, in the trunk. Is it reasonable to have a person be in that situation? And so my son, yeah, no, that doesn't make any sense. And I leave it there for him. We're going to return to that and we're going to ask, we're going to talk about this stuff. One last thing I want to say, I know my time is short, because I have to mention it. The candidate for president recently mentioned Sandra Bland's name. It doesn't happen very much. I need to mention India Cummings' name. As a woman, she was 27 years old when she left this world. Her birthday was in March. I find it very ironic that she finally died on February 21st. When she was transferred from the holding center on February 17th to ECMC, they tested her and they found that she had a broken arm, broken ribs, she was severely dehydrated, her kidneys had stopped functioning, and she was brain dead. That's the condition she came in there with. In the next 4 days, she was kept alive with machines, and on the 21st, she passed away. February 21st, it's 51 years after Malcolm X was murdered. I feel like the black body is still a target in America. And we still have the fundamental problem of saying, are we loved and can we be loved in this land?
Well, before we proceed to questions, can we have a hand for our wonderful panelists? I think it's fair to say we chose well. Questions, discussion. Someone, anyone? John, I'm going to ask that you take the microphone from Joy.
Thank you all panelists. It was a great eye-opener for me today. I taught at Niagara County Community College for 30 years, and for the last 5 years I I taught black lit because the course was in the file and we lost our black teacher and they did not replace her. So a black friend of mine challenged me to teach the course. He said, quote, "You don't know jack about black culture." So I took upon it as a male pissing contest, I think. But
This is a family environment, John.
this is a family environment. I'm sorry about that. I remember teaching the course, and there was several white kids in there who took the course because it was the last course on the block that they had to fulfill their lit course requirements. And there was a couple of angry white kids, one of whom, when I brought up the concept of black aesthetics, you know, I brought up a slide of a girl in a red dress, and I juxtaposed it to Mona Lisa, and I said, "How do you define beauty?" We've been using Mona Lisa as a classic European white-centered concept of beauty, and here you've got this simple, gorgeous painting of a girl in a red dress. And we got into a discussion of the African American, or the African physiognomy.
John, I don't want to interrupt you.
Okay.
We'll get to a question here.
I will, okay. The concept he makes here, a grand orgy of black and white until we are all beige, in the book. Could you respond to that? That comment that many Americans want to talk about, white Americans want to talk, I don't have a page, I'm sorry, I just wrote it down. That many white Americans feel that we should be colorblind? Sure.
So,
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Just get back to Joe.
so I've been teaching Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, and it's one of the things she grapples with is, the subtitle of the book is Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness. And one of those things she grapples with is the fact that we have a legal structure of color blindness that has effectively been used to basically shield the authorities from responsibility for race-conscious techniques and policies. So we've seen, she discusses this quite exhaustively, an evisceration of the Fourth Amendment. We've seen prosecutors who still have a material advantage over defenders who are, public defenders who are overwhelmed with court caseloads. Prosecutors can be very aggressive in bringing charges, and they can be selective. So she points out, you know, there's one case where you have a whole year in a state where not one white person faces federal charges for crack cocaine. Because what the prosecutor did is they prosecuted every white offender on state laws and black offenders on federal laws, which are harder, more destructive, more punitive. And prosecutors also have the power to pick who's going to be on the jury. And so we have a return of all white juries. It's pretty standard in our jurisprudence now. So we have this idea of color blindness, and it's an effective shield for color conscious policies that are extremely destructive. So I think my response to that is that it's part of the dream. It's what we would like to be because it makes us feel good as Americans, right? We certainly like the idea of a melting pot. And let's face it, you know, my son's good looking. You know, these mixed race kids, they're attractive. It's a congratulation for America, but it's also, unfortunately, a weapon.
And just very quickly, I just wanted to say, whenever you hear someone talk about a colorblind society, I say run from them, because usually that term is used to hide a multitude of faults. And we should not veer away from color, I mean, when I look out at the audience, all of us here are dressed differently. An array of colors and tones and shades. It's not the issue that the color is the problem, it's the issue that the definition that we place on that color is the problem. So we need a new definition of color to extract ourselves from this problem that we find ourselves in.
I did forget, one of the comments that the girl made in the class was, you know, if you just took the black color off of that black girl and the girl in the red dress, what difference would it make? And that's when there was dead silence in the class. Like I said, you have two choices. You can universalize it, bleach it out of existence, or you can talk about the individuality of that color that makes it so beautiful.
Dr. Neal has pointed out we're all wearing different things. I specifically told him how deeply offended I was by the Yankees cap. And he chose to wear it anyway. So.
Hi. First of all, I'm kind of embarrassed because I thought the whole thing was a memoir from the beginning, but you told me it's not a memoir.
It's more of
The letter and a
it's more of a letter that he's writing to his 15-year-old son, trying to set a goal,
Okay,
like
all right.
this is what I've gone through as a black man, and this is how you should probably maneuver this world.
I just want to comment. I said
But it's part memoir too.
it's some of the best prose I've written in read in a very long time, and I can understand why you bring up Baldwin. I can understand why you bring up Beloved, because I see a little bit in that movie, in all of it, in a condensed form. The only problem I have is that I think as though the prose is speaking to me. I can't understand how a white person could really appreciate it as well as I can. I might be wrong in that, but that's why I asked Frank, I said, how did you pick this book? Because I just couldn't appreciate that.
I picked the book, did I just try to, okay. The experience of race, the experience of African Americans in the United States is all of our experience. It's relevant to all of us. Obviously, I can't and don't experience the things that were in the book. I read the book and found it deeply humbling. And I think as we're starting to confront race as a concept in the 21st century, I think we also are starting to confront issues like white privilege, which I'm very conscious of, which exists. And I think in the same way, if you acknowledge that racism exists, and you're intellectually honest, you have to understand that white privilege exists. So this can't be this has to be a conversation among all of us. So that's one of the reasons I chose it, because this is not just an African American issue. This is an American issue. It's one of the primary defining things of our nation. If you look through our history, the things that we're most ashamed of is the legacy of slavery. The things that we're most proud of is our legacy of civil rights.
Yeah. Hi. I've got a kind of comment and question. I find it...
Have you turned on your radio?
No radio. One of the things I find interesting is this quick move to want to go to beige. I was telling one of my...
Did you say want to go to beige?
To want to go to beige.
Beige, the
like
color beige, I see, okay.
Becoming beige. And we don't talk to Italians about becoming non-Italian. We don't talk to Polish people about giving up being Polish. So why is it that we want to talk to black people about giving up blackness when it's not something we created? And the kinds of mechanisms, as Heron was saying, that are most salient and valuable is this experience of surviving. And not only surviving, but surviving and being able to celebrate. So if I'm going to pose a question, I might ask, why does the colorblind approach lead us to want to divest black people of blackness rather than to redefine the way we look at race?
I'll pass the mic around. and ask everybody to respond briefly, and then I think we have time for one last question. Joy, over here, the after everybody responds.
Well, I would have to say that, like Dr. Neal has said, there's something wrong with being colorblind. I think we all need to open our eyes and see the differences that we have and to be able to celebrate those differences. But of course, from the reading of African history or world history, our question as to who we are, our color, has always been at the forefront. It's why we were chosen to come. It's why we work the fields. It's why we were raped. It's why we can't vote. It's not just now. You know, it's a whole history of our being in this world, especially as it relates to our being in America. So the color blindness and the move to beige, I don't think is where we're going.
I think we have an aversion with dealing with some of the ugliness of the imperial colonial past. Race was a kind of invention that we latched onto to the wealthy could use to secure a labor source and keep apart poor white laborers from enslaved Africans. So there's an incentive system piled on top of race. And this is the problem, is that we don't just see the color, there are the deep associations with the color, the history of oppression. We have a worldwide phenomenon of color being interpreted to mean something good when you're pale and something bad when you're dark. So those associations, I think, make it very difficult for us to reconstruct race in positive ways. But I think it's clear that there's a deep challenge for us to do so, and I'd like to just mention a kind of a reminder from this book. Baldwin talks about how American society lacks something. And that Africans bring a kind of energy, creativity, and culture to the American context that's essential. So we couldn't be America without black people and what the black body has bequeathed to America in terms of vividity and just style and culture and life. So we're trapped. We keep associating blackness with bad things, but we can't do without it. And we're not going to have an America without blackness. So it's a challenge that we simply have to find a way to meet.
Okay, well, Anthony, you good?
Oh, quickly, I just want to say I'm so glad I came. I'm glad I heard you guys yesterday on the radio. And it's good to see Sharon and people. But I've been advocating against this corruption and justice for 40-something years, and I've been on various levels. The latest of having my son have the most corrupt, horrific trial that you could ever believe, and I'll be so glad when I can finish my book. I keep living it and thinking, I think I have savior syndrome, because the group is Mothers of Those in Crisis, and so we're loaded with it. But I've got personal and professional experience. I've worked in the criminal justice system.
I don't want to interrupt, but we're almost out of time. If you just get to your question.
Anyway, I just want to tell you, we don't have one. I just want to know when we're going to do it again. I heard you say on the program yesterday we're going to do something on this program. But I want to give you another logo that they use. What makes you get arrested? It's BWB. Y'all know what it is? Breathing while black. Amen.
Eva Doyle had a question?
Frank, yeah, we actually have two more questions.
Sure, unless it's 1 o'clock. That's the time that we sort of gave, but I'll be happy to stay for a few more minutes, obviously.
Yes, I just want to say something real quick. As a longtime classroom teacher, I used 2 books with my students, and I had both black and white students and Native American students, and one was Colors All Around Me. a beautiful book that talked about all the colors that black people come in, from the tan to the deepest black to copper, and it was just such a beautiful book, and the children responded in a very positive way to it. The other one was Black is Beautiful. So I think that it starts with young children, because I had kindergarten, first and second children, and introducing these positive attributes of being black is something I think we really need. But I have one quick question for, I don't know if the panel or one person can answer. There has been, from some in the black community, a negativity toward the remake of Roots. And the conversation has been, why do we have to keep hearing about what happened to black folks during slavery? So maybe you can, I know the answer, but I want to know what you want to say, what you have to say.
I could speak long on this topic, but I won't. And I'll just say, we need to keep watching it until we get it. We don't get it yet. And when I was watching it and reviewing this book, it was the same. It was the black body in Roots that was being taken. It was Coates' son. It was the things that he was trying to describe. So my feeling is, until we get what enslavement is about, we need another Roots.
Joy, after this gentleman, there's a young man over here.
I think, really quickly, history is the blood of the race. You know, Du Bois talks about race in a different way than other people did. He tried to say that, you know, it's not that race isn't really rooted in our body, it's actually rooted in history. And if you can appreciate that move, I think a way to understand it conceptually is history is like blood. It circulates the life of the race. So we will literally forget who we are if we don't have the blood of the memory of who we were.
Yes.
Yeah, like the gentleman here was saying, can we be loved? For example, I always go to the corner store across from EOC, Brian and Stratton. The guy always looks at me like I'm stealing. I try to be so polite, like I was raised to do. And I'm polite, and he doesn't see that. You know, so to answer your question, also with a question, but you say, can we be loved? I started asking myself that. And then I started to think, how can I explain it to my daughter? How can we be loved? I think it starts at home. But who's gonna explain to his children if they're raised up how he is?
Can I just... Hate is a learned trait, and I think it was Dennis Leary who pointed that out. He said, you know, my son is 9. You know what he hates? Naps. That's the only thing he's ever done. So it's never an excuse, but it's learned behavior. Are we unlearning it as we progress? I think from what we've heard today, obviously not enough. But I think people thought perhaps because we had, I guess you could say a black president, but he has a mother from a white mom from Kansas, just like I do. So why is he not white? That's why I put very little credence into the notion of race. But it's a learned behavior. All I can say to this gentleman is, you're loved here at the library. I'm sorry about what's happening there. Does anybody else want to talk about that?
I'll just very quickly, a point of reference that I think we can all identify with in this topic. We have to keep talking about this topic, and we have to keep talking about that particular history, because until it's such time as we can figure out ourselves, why does the action of a 4-year-old boy falling into a gorilla pit ends up becoming a discussion about race? And until we can figure that out, we have to keep talking about it.
Are there any other questions? All right, one more time, please thank our wonderful, wonderful panel. And please join us on October the 5th for our discussion of Half Earth. It'll be an important ecological discussion. We have one panelist confirmed. It's in the flyers, and thank you all so much for coming. I think it was a wonderful debut. There's a couple issues.